The stale air of my sister's dining room was thick with the usual Sunday tension, but today it was suffocating. My brother-in-law, Mark, a man who equated salary with soul, finally broke the silence. He slammed his phone on the table, a Forbes article glowing on the screen. "So, Elias," he began, his voice dripping with a venom I knew well, "your little teaching hobby is finally paying off, huh?" He didn't need to read the headline aloud. I'd been staring at it all morning. Tech billionaire Leo Jiang names high school teacher his greatest inspiration. Every eye was on me. Not with pride, but with a cold, calculating shock. The family's charity case, their resident failure, was suddenly valuable. My sister, Clara, stared at her half-eaten roast beef, her knuckles white around her fork. For 20 years, she'd been the one apologizing for my career choice, her pity a constant bitter sauce on every family meal. Beside her, Mark's smirk widened. He was a man who saw the world as a ladder and had kicked down anyone below him, including me. Presiding over it all was my mother, Eleanor, the matriarch. Her silence was a weapon, and she wielded it with surgical precision. She adjusted the pearl necklace I could never afford, her expression shifting from stony disapproval to sharp, avaricious calculation. She was the one who at every holiday would ask if I was still happy with the little school thing. Finally, her voice sliced through the tension, thin and brittle. "The article mentions a foundation, Elias. It says Mr. Jiang is entrusting you with a significant gift." Her eyes, cold and assessing, locked onto mine. It wasn't a question of pride. It was an audit. The vultures were no longer circling. They were demanding their share of a carcass they hadn't even killed. I let my mother's question hang in the air. A toxic perfume. A significant gift. The words echoed, but they were drowned out by the ghosts of 25 years of their dismissals. I looked at Mark's smug face, and suddenly, I wasn't in this dining room. I was 22, sitting in a steakhouse I couldn't afford, telling them I was turning down a law school acceptance to get my teaching certificate. Mark had actually laughed, a short, barking sound. "So you want to be poor on purpose? Is that the goal?" My father, before he passed, had just shaken his head. But my mother, her disappointment was a physical force. "Elias, we gave you the best education. For what? So you can babysit teenagers and have your summers off." "I want to make a difference," I'd said, my voice sounding young and naive even to my own ears. "You can make a difference from the corner office of a skyscraper," Mark had countered, gesturing with a steak knife. "That's real power. The rest is just a hobby." A hobby, that's what they'd called it ever since. The memory dissolved, replaced by another. Clara, on the phone about 10 years ago, her voice oozing with a pity that was more insulting than any insult. "Elias, it's not too late. Mark knows a guy in logistics. It's not glamorous, but it's a real career. We're just worried about you. Worried I couldn't afford the life they saw as the only one worth living." Their worry manifested in Christmas gifts, of grocery store gift cards, and carefully worded questions about my car's mileage. Every act of kindness was a reminder of my perceived failure, a small twist of the knife to keep me in my place. They saw a man wasting his potential. They never saw what I saw. They never saw a 15-year-old Leo Jiang, a brilliant, terrified kid, hiding in the back of my physics class. He was an immigrant with threadbare clothes and a mind that moved like lightning. While other kids were doodling, Leo was sketching rocket schematics in his notebook. He never spoke in class, terrified of his accent. One afternoon, I kept him after school. I didn't ask about his grades. I pointed to a drawing of a multi-stage propulsion system. "This is genius, Leo," I told him. "Don't ever let anyone convince you to dream smaller." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a shock that I'd even noticed him. For the first time all year he smiled. Now, that smile was worth over $10 billion. And my family, who had never once asked about a single student, were looking at me like I just revealed a winning lottery ticket. I finally met my mother's gaze, the ghosts of the past swirling around me. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in the uncomfortable space they had created. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Leo was very generous." I offered no more. Let them starve on the details. Mark leaned forward, the predator scenting blood. "Generous is one thing, Elias. Smart is another." He tapped a manicured finger on the table. "I've already drafted a preliminary proposal. My logistics company is perfect for scaling Jiang's new European distribution network. All I need is a 30-minute meeting. You get him in the room, I'll handle the rest. I'll even cut you in for 5% for the introduction, a finder's fee. A finder's fee for a student I'd spent countless hours nurturing." He saw Leo not as a person, but as a walking, talking ATM, and me as the PIN. Before I could respond, Clara placed her hand on my arm. Her touch felt like a claim. "Mark, don't be so transactional," she chided, though her eyes held the same desperate gleam. She turned to me, her face a mask of practiced sincerity. "Elias, honey, this is about family. We've been so worried about you for so long. This is a blessing for all of us. Think of what this foundation could do. A small grant for Mark's business. A little something to help with the kids. College tuition. It's what family does. We lift each other up." She said we lift each other up, as if she hadn't spent 2 decades pushing me down with her pity. The ghosts of those grocery store gift cards flickered in my mind. They weren't gifts, they were chains. I pulled my arm away. "The foundation has a very specific mission," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It's for underprivileged students in STEM, like Leo was." The air went frigid. My answer was a wall, and they had just run into it at full speed. Mark's jaw tightened. Clara's mask of concern slipped, revealing raw frustration, but it was my mother who delivered the killing blow. She set her wineglass down with a decisive click that silenced the room. For a moment she looked almost sad. It was a terrifying expression on her. "Your father would be so disappointed, Elias," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "Dad would be proud." I shot back, the first crack in my composure. "No," she shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "He would be heartbroken. Because he saw what you were throwing away. We both did." She paused, letting the words sink in, twisting the knife. "Do you remember when you were up for that department head position 10 years ago? The one that went to Mrs. Albright?" I remembered. It was a bitter pill. I was more qualified, but the principal had been vague, mentioning parental concerns. My mother looked me dead in the eye, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more chilling than a shout. "That was me, Elias. I called the principal. I told him I didn't think you could handle the responsibility. I told him you were fragile, that you were better suited to a less demanding role." The world tilted. The stale air in the dining room was suddenly impossible to breathe. She hadn't just disapproved of my life, she had actively sabotaged it. To keep me small. To keep me as the family failure she could pity and control. "Why?" The word was a choked whisper. Her expression hardened, the brief flicker of sadness gone, replaced by the cold pragmatism I knew so well. "Because I thought one day you would wake up and see sense. I thought if things got hard enough you would quit this fantasy and get a real job. I did it for your own good. For my own good." The 3 most malicious words in the English language. She looked at me, not with remorse, but with expectation. As if this confession was simply another tool of manipulation. As if, after revealing this ultimate betrayal, I would finally break and give them exactly what they wanted. The silence that followed my mother's confession was a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked the air from my lungs. For a moment, I was that fragile man she described, teetering on a precipice she had built for me. Mark's smirk had vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed panic. Even he knew a line had been crossed. Clara stared at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. A sound escaped my throat. It wasn't a sob or a gasp. It was a laugh. Low, dry, and utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of a lock finally clicking open after 25 years of picking at it with the wrong key. I looked directly at my mother, the matriarch, the saboteur. "For my own good," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. The sound of it seemed to sober me. "No, you did it for your own good. You needed me to be the failure, didn't you? My small life was the dark backdrop that made yours seem so bright. It was your favorite story to tell yourself." I swiveled my gaze to Mark. "You laughed at me in that steakhouse. You called my life a hobby." Then to Clara. "You pitied me with gift cards and worried calls. You were all so invested in the tragedy of Elias Vance, the brilliant boy who threw it all away." I pushed my chair back, the scrape of its legs against the wood floor a shriek in the dead quiet. I stood up, feeling taller than I had in this house in decades. They all watched me, frozen, like prey that had just seen the trap spring on the hunter instead. "The funny thing is," I said, my voice as level as a surgeon's scalpel, "you were right about one thing, Mother. My job is demanding. It demands that I see potential where others see nothing. It demands I protect students from people who try to shrink their dreams to fit a smaller, more comfortable box." I walked to the end of the table and placed my napkin down beside my untouched plate. "Leo and I are meeting next Tuesday to finalize the Foundation's board of directors. He asked me if I knew anyone trustworthy for the financial and logistical oversight committees. A family member," he suggested. "Someone I'd bet my life on." I let the words hang in the air, a phantom of the fortune they had just lost. I looked at Mark's desperate face, Clara's dawning horror, and my mother's crumbling composure. "I was going to suggest you," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "All of you. Because despite everything, I still believed in that word. Family." I paused, letting them feel the full weight of the door I was about to close. "Thank you for clearing up my confusion." The heavy oak door of my sister's house clicked shut behind me, and the sound was a period on a sentence 25 years long. I didn't run. I walked to my 10-year-old sedan, the one Mark always joked was a classic by default, and slid behind the wheel. The engine turned over with a familiar, comforting rumble. It was the first honest sound I'd heard all day. Driving through the manicured streets of their neighborhood, past brick fortresses with perfect lawns, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. That would come. What I felt was a strange, chilling clarity. My mother's confession wasn't a crack in the foundation of our family. It was proof the entire structure was rotten from the ground up, built on a bedrock of lies and resentment. She hadn't just held me back. She had tethered me to a post, then berated me for not running a marathon. Back in my small, quiet apartment, the place Clara called cozy, with the same tone one might use for a well-maintained cage, the silence was a balm. My gaze fell on my phone, sitting on the cluttered coffee table. For years, they had made me feel like my life was a waiting room, waiting for a better job, a bigger salary, a real life. They were right. I had been waiting. I just hadn't realized it was for this exact moment. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over Liu Jiang's name. This wasn't just a student anymore. He was an ally. The only one I had. I pressed the call button before the doubt my mother had so carefully cultivated could take root. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Vance." "I was just looking over the preliminary charter. You were right, the language in Section 4B was too ambiguous. I tightened it up." His voice was warm, energetic, a world away from the frigid calculation of my family's dining room. "Thank you, Leo. You always had an eye for detail." There was a pause. Leo's brilliance wasn't just in physics, it was in people. "Are you all right, sir? You sound different." I sat down on my worn-out sofa. "I am, Leo. Better than I've been in a long time. I took a breath. I've had a clarifying conversation with my family regarding the foundation. Ah, he said, the single syllable loaded with understanding. He didn't pry for details, he didn't need them. The board appointments, do you need more time? No, I said, my voice firm, resolute. I need to move faster, and I need to do it publicly. This was it, the strategic pivot. My family sees the foundation not as a mission, but as a resource to be plundered. They see you as a contact, and me as a doorman. To protect what we're building, we need to send a message, one that can't be misinterpreted. I understand completely, Leo said, his tone shifting from friendly to focused. He was no longer my former student. He was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. A controlled narrative. What do you have in mind? I want to hold a press event, I began, the plan forming in my mind with crystalline precision, not at some hotel ballroom, at Northwood High. In the auditorium, the place where it all started. On your turf. I like it, Leo said. My team can have it arranged in 48 hours. What's the play? We'll announce the Foundation's first initiative, a full scholarship and mentorship program for 100 students in the district. We'll announce the official name, the Jiang Vance Foundation, and then we will announce the founding members of the board. Who do you have in mind? He asked. I thought of Mrs. Albright, the woman my mother's betrayal had promoted over me. She was retiring this year, a tough but fair administrator who had always championed the science department, even on a shoestring budget. I thought of a local accountant, a parent I knew who ran a small, scrupulously honest firm, people of integrity, people who understood the work. I have a short list, I said. People of substance, not status. But the most important part of this, Leo, is the invitation list. Go on. I want your office to send formal invitations to my mother, Eleanor Vance, my sister, Clara, and her husband, Mark. Send them by courier tomorrow morning. I could picture the scene perfectly. The crisp, expensive envelope arriving, the thrill of anticipation. And I want them worded very specifically. I'm listening, Mr. Vance. The invitation should read, at the personal request of Elias Vance, you are cordially invited to attend the inaugural announcement of the Jiang Vance Foundation, in celebration of the community that fosters future leaders. I paused, letting the words sink in. A special section will be reserved for honored guests and family. Make it sound like an honor. Make it feel like their moment of arrival, the one they've been waiting for. Make them believe they're about to be publicly anointed. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a fleeting second I worried I had gone too far, that I had revealed a pettiness that would disappoint him. Then Leo spoke, and his voice was filled with a quiet, fierce loyalty that almost brought me to my knees. Mr. Vance, he said softly, you once told me that the most elegant solution in physics is often the one that applies the maximum force at the most precise point. Consider it done. We finalized a few more details, and then we hung up. I stood and walked to my window, looking down at the quiet street. My apartment didn't feel small anymore. It felt like a command center. For 25 years, my family had written a story about me, casting me as the tragic figure, the gentle failure. They had read me chapter and verse from that book at every holiday, every Sunday dinner. But they had made a critical error. They thought they were the authors. They never realized they were just characters. And I was the one holding the pen. The stage was set. The invitations were on their way. All they had to do was show up for the final act. The courier arrived at my sister's house at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning, as I knew he would. Mark called me less than 10 minutes later, his voice an oily blend of triumph and condescension. He didn't apologize. He didn't mention my mother's confession. He simply acted as if Sunday dinner had been a successful negotiation. Got the invitation, Elias. Very impressive. Knew you'd come to your senses, he said, the sound of him smiling evident over the phone. Clara's already picking out a dress. We'll see you Tuesday. Try to wear a decent suit. He hung up before I could reply. He thought he'd won. They all did. They saw the embossed invitation not as bait, but as their due. It was a summons to their coronation. My mother, I was sure, was already mentally redecorating her house with the proceeds of her son's newfound usefulness. The Northwood High Auditorium hadn't changed much in the 25 years I'd been teaching here. The same faint smell of floor wax and adolescent angst. But today, it was transformed. Giancour's sleek, minimalist banners flanked the stage, and a constellation of television cameras and lighting rigs had turned the familiar space into a professional media stage. I stood in the wings, watching the room fill with local reporters, city officials, and members of the school board. This was my ground. Every scuff mark on this stage was a memory. Every echo in the hall, a student's voice. And for the first time, I felt an absolute sense of power in it. This wasn't a family dining room where I could be belittled. This was my arena. Then, they arrived. Mark, in a suit so sharp it could cut glass, practically vibrated with ambition. Clara glided in beside him in a sapphire dress, her eyes sweeping the room for important faces. And my mother, Eleanor, walked with the regal bearing of a queen arriving to claim her territory, her pearls a stark white against her dark, expensive coat. An usher, a polite young woman from Leo's PR team, intercepted them. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson? Mrs. Vance? Right this way. We have a special section reserved for you." She led them to the very front row. 3 seats, dead center. They beamed, settling in. They saw it as the place of honor, the best seats in the house. They couldn't see what I saw, that they weren't guests in a box suite, but specimens under a microscope, perfectly positioned for the glare of the lights and the unforgiving gaze of the cameras. Leo took the stage to a wave of applause. He was magnetic, speaking with an easy confidence that held the room captive. He told his story, the shy immigrant kid, the spark of an idea, the journey to success. He spoke of the crucial role of mentors. "You can have all the talent in the world," he said, his eyes finding mine in the wings, "but it's meaningless until someone sees it. Until one person looks at you and says, 'Don't ever let anyone convince you to dream smaller.'" My family drank it in. They nodded along, basking in the reflected glory. Mark leaned toward Clara, whispering something that made her smile. They thought this was their story too. The family who had patiently supported the humble teacher who had, in turn, discovered a diamond. They were ready for their close-up. Then, Leo called my name. "Please welcome the co-chair of our foundation, and the man this is all for, Mr. Elias Vance." The applause was a physical wave. I walked to the podium, the lights warm on my face. I looked out and saw them. My mother, giving me a small proprietary nod. Mark, with an expectant, greedy glint in his eye. "Thank you, Leo," I began, my voice steady, amplified throughout the hall. "To guide this foundation, we need a board of directors. People of unimpeachable integrity, who understand that our greatest resource is not capital, but human potential." I saw Mark subtly straighten his tie, readying himself to stand. I let my eyes lock with my mother's. "Our financial oversight will be handled by a man known for his meticulous and ethical work in our community, Mr. David Chen." A polite man in the third row stood for a moment. Mark's face froze, a flicker of confusion. "And chairing our educational outreach committee," I continued, my voice clear and deliberate, "is a woman whose 30-year career at Northwood has been a masterclass in dedication. The recently retired and widely respected former department head, Mrs. Evelyn Albright." My mother's face went slack. Her mouth opened slightly, a silent, shocked, "Oh." The name, a ghost from the past, had materialized in the worst possible way. Clara stared at her, then at me, her face a mask of dawning horror. I named the rest of the board, a community organizer, a brilliant local engineer, a university provost. With each name, my family sank lower in their seats, the trap closing around them. When I named the last board member, a local community leader known for her fierce advocacy for children. The list was complete. A wall of competence and integrity now stood between my family and Leo's generosity. I let the silence hang for a beat before delivering the final, carefully aimed volley. The Jiang Vance Foundation will be built on one principle above all else, I said, my voice resonating with a new authority. My gaze swept past the cameras and reporters and settled, with deliberate weight, on the front row. That principle is unwavering support. It's about seeing the spark in someone and protecting it, not trying to extinguish it for your own convenience or comfort. Mark's face was a blotchy, furious red. Clara had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. But my mother simply stared at me, her mask of regal composure shattered, revealing the raw, bitter core of a woman who had just been publicly outmaneuvered at her own game. She looked old, small. "This foundation is not for people who see others as rungs on a ladder," I continued, the words sharp and precise. "It is for the people who hold the ladder steady. It is for the teachers, the mentors, the true family you build, who celebrate your success as if it were their own, without ever asking what's in it for me." I paused, letting the implications sink into their marrow. I offered the camera a small, sad smile. "It's a lesson I learned the hard way, over many years, and for that I am profoundly grateful." My gaze found my mother's one last time. "Thank you all." The auditorium erupted in applause. It was a deafening roar of approval. I stepped back from the podium as Leo walked over, a look of immense respect in his eyes. He put a hand on my shoulder. "That, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice low so only I could hear, "was a master class." I looked over his shoulder. The press was swarming the stage, but my family remained trapped in their front row seats. The cameras, which they had craved, were now their prison bars. They couldn't flee without creating a scene. They could only sit there, exposed and silent, forced to watch the standing ovation for the man they had spent a lifetime trying to keep small. Their failure was now the main event. Has your family, or anyone else, ever made you feel small for your career choice, only for you to have a moment of perfect vindication later? I would love to hear your stories.